To all who come to this happy place, welcome. Disneyland is your land.
Walt Disney said Disneyland would never be complete as long as there's imagination left in the world.
And when you think about Disney parks and all the attractions and characters there, someone has to design and build it all.
And that takes a ton of artists and engineers working closely together. We call these people Imagineers.
I'm Dawson Dill, and I'm an Imagineer in our research and development studio.
And I'm Margaret Carrison. I'm an Imagineer at the Story Development Studio.
In Disney's Imagineering in a Box, we're going to go behind the scenes with the artists and engineers and see how they design and build the worlds, attractions, and characters for Disney parks.
Disneyland is an example of the first theme park. The theme park is all about stepping inside a story.
You are living a story rather than just watching.
Where people can realize the stories and the games and the movies that they've only seen on the screen.
Everything that you see, hear, smell, touch, and taste comes together to completely immerse you in an all-new place.
Imagineering is all about taking the imaginary and making it real.
Imagineers take imagination and engineering to design and create our parks.
Imagineering is a collection of diverse disciplines coming together.
Civil engineering, mechanical engineering,
costume designers, digital sculptors, ride mechanics,
improvisational comedians,
dimensional designers, sculptors,
special effects, painters, we have color specialists.
I'm gonna keep going.
architects,
creative directors,
mathematicians,
robotics,
carpenters,
songwriters.
There's a team here that designs the scents that go into our parks.
We have people that do nothing but sculpt rocks.
I think about taking my daughter to the park and saying, look, Mommy got to do that rock right there. So I think that's pretty cool.
In junior high, I tended towards the areas of mathematics and physics, but I had this creative love and passion for Disney. So I actually typed into Google math plus Disney, and Imagineering is what showed up. So I said, that's what I'm gonna do.
I am a mechanical engineer. However, since I've been a little girl, I've always been an artist at heart. And so I really enjoyed having that sort of a creative outlet, but still get to be technical.
I think the most surprising thing about Imagineering is that this is a real job, and it can feel like a real job. The magic comes with the work.
There's a lot of planning, a lot of development, and a lot of trial and error before we actually get it to a final product.
I'm still surprised at the level of detail. Everything is given so much thought to make it the best possible experience that we can for our guests.
having the ability to go and experience those tiny, tiny little details is unique to Disneyland.
It makes me feel really proud to be on a team of people who put their blood, sweat, and tears into something like that, and people who have really thought about everything, thought about how a guest will feel in this space, thought about how a guest will remember this space. I got chills. I get chills thinking about that. It's cool.
With Disney's Imagineering in a Box, you'll learn all about the Imagineering process, from the spark of an idea to the building of a magical place.
And you'll get to Imagineer a theme park experience of your very own.
Hi, I'm Josh Gorin, and I work in creative development here at Walt Disney Imagineering. That means I help teams of Imagineers through the process of creating new ideas and technologies for our parks. I'll be your host for this first lesson, which is about how we design themed lands for Disneyland and our other theme parks around the world. Along the way, I'll be joined by Imagineers that specialize in various aspects of the process. Each land is an area within a theme park that allows you, the guest, to be transported to a new and exotic place. In this lesson, we've created a series of exercises that will guide you through the design process for a land of your own, allowing you to answer the question, if you could go anywhere, where would you go? We'll also give you a behind-the-scenes look at a number of different lands, with a focus on these three. Cars Land in Disney California Adventure Park, based on the Cars movies from Pixar. Pandora the world of Avatar in Disney's Animal Kingdom, located in Florida and based on the movie Avatar. And Treasure Cove in Shanghai Disneyland, located in Shanghai, China, and based on the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction. Each of these lands tells a particular story and is based on an underlying theme. The focus of this video is the role of story.
Every time we start a new project, we always ask ourselves, what is the story?
Treasure Cove is a hypothetical island we created, set in the Caribbean. And our story is, it started as an obscure Spanish settlement, which was later taken over by the British, and then turned into a happy pirate haven when Captain Jack Sparrow and his crew arrived. And the time is set around 1730.
In Cars Land, each person is an honorary car, and they're in Cars Land on race day.
And Mater's having a junkyard jamboree as kind of a festival to celebrate race day, and the big event is happening at Radiator Springs Racers.
In the story of Pandora, you are walking into a national park on an exotic alien planet.
And this is a story about the value of nature. It's about respect for an environment. It's about respect for indigenous people and their values. And this is the world that you enter, where we are invited to come and visit the Na'vi, who are the indigenous people, and to learn from them how to be better stewards of our own planet. So this is the idea of the land.
Theme park storytelling is different than what you might be familiar with from movies, TV, or theater. Those differences are important, so let's hear more.
The first is that our story is multisensory. Everything is happening to you. What you smell, what you see, what you hear, how you feel, the temperature, the time of day, how you personally choose to move through space. So we're telling our story using every possible sense that a human being would present.
You have to think about complete immersion all the way around a human being. So we have a whole group of people that work to design music and sound that feels natural and believable to the place that you're in. The smells of the place are important, and some of that comes from the food being cooked. And what you touch is very important. In a theme park, you touch the sets, you touch the ground. And so all those things have to feel authentic and true. And if it's not supposed to be plastic, it shouldn't feel like plastic.
Secondarily, our story is not necessarily told in a line.
If you're watching a film or a TV show, there is a director who's giving you a point of view. They're saying, look here, now you're gonna look here, and now you're gonna look here, right? When you cut scenes. In environmental storytelling, the guest that walks into the park is the director. They're looking, and their point of view is the director's point of view, right? So when you walk into one of our lands, let's take Cars Land, for example. When you walk into Cars Land and you see the Radiator Springs sign, some people might look at that first, or they might just completely bypass that and walk straight into Mater's Junkyard Jamboree. And the way that guests would walk into a land and decide where they want to take their story first, that is environmental storytelling. They get to choose.
And this is one of the reasons why the story has to come at you through all these different senses, because I don't really know how it's going to start or how it's going to end. You are moving freely through this space, experiencing the story all at once at every moment.
The third difference is that in environmental storytelling, the guest has a role in the story.
In an experiential story, the guest, each person experiencing the story, is really the center of that story.
We want all of our guests to feel like they belong in the story, that they are characters that they can play, if they choose to do so, in our lands.
So when you invite someone into a land, they're not just observers, they're there to play a part. And so when you design the land, you have to make sure to include the guests in that story and give them an opportunity to engage in it.
So in summary, Imagineers are environmental storytellers, and this kind of storytelling has three main differences from other forms of storytelling. It's storytelling with all the senses. The story unfolds in an unpredictable way as the guest travels through the land, and finally, the guest often has a role in the story. In the following exercise, we ask you to think about a story that you love, and to use that story to inspire a land of your very own design. In the last video and exercise, we talked about the role of story in the creation of a land. Really great stories have a deeper meaning behind them called a theme. The theme is the unifying idea, the thing that the story is about. For example, in the movie Cars, the story is about Lightning McQueen and his adventure, but the theme is that life is about the journey, not the destination. Another example, in all of the Star Wars films from the Star Wars universe, we hear lots of stories about lots of different characters, but they're all united by a common theme, the power of hope. So when we design a theme park, we need to have a deep understanding of the theme we want to communicate. Let's hear more about theme.
We call ourselves storytellers and we're telling a story. And a story is what happens. A theme is what's the story about. And that theme can really influence the whole design and tone of a project.
Theme is the deep interior meaning of a story. For example, Avatar is not about a planet. Avatar is about our deep obligation to be respectful to the living world. That's a theme.
If you think about watching a really good film, when you walk out of the theater, what is it that you've taken away from that story that changes you? Because if you think about all the best stories that you've ever watched or listened to or read or experienced, there is a change that happens in you, and that is really, really rooted into a very strong theme. I love amusement parks. I love amusement parks. There is a big difference, though, between a theme park and an amusement park.
An amusement park tends to be focused on physical sensation. A theme park is built, just like a novel, around a theme. So the first thing you should understand from a theme park is that it is about something. And anything inside of it is only there because those things are also about what the theme park is about.
Nowadays, I think of it as immersive world, really, is the theme park 2.0. We want to create an extremely immersive and authentic land. And we want you to truly believe that you're in this place. So the difference between a theme park and an amusement park is that a theme park has stories that are interconnected and integrated, and that all of the various pieces speak to one another.
A theme park sets you on a series of experiences that you kind of know where you are and where you're going, and that informs the design of everything within that particular land.
Theme informs every aspect of a story and the way it's told. And for Imagineers, it acts as the touchstone for everything we do when we bring stories to life in the real world.
We create huge projects, and we have to make thousands of decisions. So the theme is your standard for decision making. The question you are always asking yourself is, does this thing or does it not help feed into the theme?
That theme is what you're designing to. It establishes the rules.
If the story of Pirates, for example, is about adventure and about freedom, that theme starts to drive how you design everything. You don't want buildings that are square and solid. You want buildings that have whimsy and fun, and it wants to be colorful, have a lot of humor built into it.
Think of Disney's Animal Kingdom, the whole park. If my theme is the intrinsic value of nature, and I have one door, and there are thousands of doors, one door, intrinsic value of nature, is that door more likely to be made of wood, or is it more likely to be made of steel? It's probably made of wood. Is that wood more likely to be smooth or rough? Intrinsic value of nature, probably rough. If there's a doorknob on a single door out of 1,000 doors in a place about the intrinsic value of nature, Is that doorknob more likely to be shiny or rusty? It's probably rusty. If there is a pattern on a doorknob the size of my thumbnail, is that pattern more likely to be geometric or organic? It's more likely to be organic. So you can see how a simple decision, is this or is it not related to the theme, can allow you to control a huge spectrum of decisions that go into making a theme park.
So you can see that theme plays a central role in everything that we do at Imagineering. And that's what helps make Disney theme parks so unique. In the next exercise, you'll have a chance to think about some themes from stories you love. You'll also get a chance to develop a theme for your own land. So far in this lesson, we've talked about story and theme. Now, let's take a look at how story and theme influence the layout of a land. That is, where everything is located. Attractions, stores, restaurants, they all need to be placed somewhere. This placement should strongly reflect the land's story and theme, but it also needs to be efficient and functional. Making sure both the form and function of a layout work well can be quite challenging.
When you go to design a whole land around a story and a theme, and you create concept sketches that capture the essence of that, then you go about the work of making it a real place that millions of guests will walk through.
We're going to have guests in these places experiencing them all day long, every day, and they have to be functional and have to be comfortable. And so we take that into great consideration. How are the guests going to navigate through all of these spaces? And we design to that.
We don't want them knowing how hard we've worked on the invisible function of that space. We want them inside of a story. And that takes a lot of coordination.
We have to always consider, hey, does a fire truck need to be able to get through here at some point?
Things like restrooms. You know, your imaginary land has to have a restroom.
We also have to be cognizant of certain systems.
Underground utilities.
An attraction queue area that keeps guests comfortable.
A lot of safety considerations like railings.
Are we having a parade that needs to go through, and how does that work?
Infrastructure corridors.
Guest flow.
Entertainment folks, food, beverage, merchandise.
Pathways.
Fireworks.
Rides.
Sightlines.
Very practical considerations that really challenge you to hold on to that vision.
So there's a game between the physical necessity of laying out the space in a way that is rational, and at the same time, still laying out the space in a way that is resonant and has poetry and is telling a story. And that when the viewer looks at the space, the first thing they think about is the emotional reaction and the meaning of the story, not the underlying function that is making it work.
Determining the layout is a major step toward taking your dream and making it someplace real. Let's look at a few distinctive examples of layouts.
For example, the layout of Disneyland, where you enter into the park and you look down Main Street, and there's kind of a thing that captures your attention down there, which is Sleeping Beauty Castle. Radiator Springs in Cars Land is such a perfect example of that, because as soon as you step into the land, you look down the street, the castle is the courthouse. And behind that, the Radiator Cap Butte, and behind that, the Cadillac Range and Ornament Valley.
So we knew we needed to recreate that street because we wanted guests to feel like they have come to Radiator Springs.
The layout of Cars Land had to be very carefully thought out. We are at human scale. So let's say, for example, if we had designed Cars Land to be at car scale, which it was designed to be in the movie, everything would be much larger. Everything would be bigger. It would feel bigger. And so what we did to kind of enhance and celebrate the charm of Radiator Springs was to bring that scale down. All of the buildings in Cars Land, the scale kind of came down to an inhabitable, comfortable scale for human beings.
So in contrast from Cars Land, when we went to lay out Pandora, we were working with a very, very different story, experiencing an alien planet. And how would we go about that?
Knowing that we have a theme of adventure, we wouldn't choose to lay out our space in a linear geometric grid, because a linear grid would make everything very obvious. And in an adventure, I must have to discover things.
We made a very wandering layout, so you're discovering one thing after another.
What that does is it makes the space work like curtains. If I'm moving along a curve, then the space is opening up like curtains as I move along the space. So I'm constantly revealing something new as I move.
No matter where you go, you're going to get a different visual. So if you're standing on one side, you might not see a waterfall, but if you go down another path, you'll see a really cool waterfall. We paid a lot of attention to discovering Pandora versus in Cars Land, you're going right down that main street and you're dancing along that street just like the cars did in the movie.
To keep your guests in story as they work through a land and encounter all kinds of things like trash cans and drinking fountains, we put a lot of detail into all of that. And when you go to design something like a restroom, you can't just drop a restroom in the middle of Treasure Cove. It's an imaginary place in the Caribbean set in 1730. So everything has to be in story. So our restroom is next to the Spanish Mansion, which is a part of our land, and it is the rum storage area. So it looks like an old rummery, and it's got rum barrels stacked up in the entryway, and it's done in beautiful Spanish tile and old stucco, and it looks like it just belongs in the story. We debated that one a lot. What are we going to do with this bathroom?
As we've heard, layout presents a challenging blend of artistry and practicality that work together to create a beautifully thematic and fully functioning land. In this next exercise, you'll have a chance to develop the layout of your land, starting with a simple map-making activity. Welcome back. You should now have a layout for a land of your own design. Now, let's talk about the design of the buildings you might find in a land. These buildings might contain rides or other attractions, restaurants, stores, and so on. The architecture of these buildings, like everything else, should reflect the theme and story of the land. The architecture can also provide a backstory about the land, the people who live there, and the history they've experienced. The design of buildings are also used to engage guests emotionally. A building with big, strong columns, say like a government building, might be meant to feel safe and stable, and a building that has lots of sharp or pointy features may feel dangerous. At the same time, the architecture needs to be functional, stable, and buildable. For example, a themed restaurant needs to have seating for guests as well as a working kitchen. A themed store must have space for merchandise as well as a stock room. And in all of these cases, large numbers of people must be able to comfortably move through the building. As we're about to hear, architecture, as practiced at Imagineering, can be somewhat unique.
One of the ways that architecture and Imagineering is different from the outside world is that we're experienced designers. More than anything, more than the brick and the mortar and how the building is going to stand, we think about the experience of the guest inside the space.
Now, when you study traditional architecture as it is taught in architectural school, the final shape of a building is really a byproduct of a bunch of functional and economic necessities that push on it. In our environment, we very well may start by saying this building absolutely must look exactly like this image from a pre-existing film. So whatever function this building has to fit inside this image. So we are using architecture to hold up a theatrical image.
We started the design of Treasure Cove, the place Treasure Cove, by visiting several different locations in the Caribbean because we wanted it to be authentic and rooted in that place. We took all those different architectural styles and brought them all together to create an imaginary place. Then you start to stylize all those buildings, which means they're not perfectly straight, which means the architects involved and the engineers involved have to have a certain sensibility about what you're trying to do.
In Cars Land, the theme of the film Cars brought us to small town America across Route 66. We actually took a 12-day trip across Route 66. We made it a point to get off of the interstate and drive the old road. We would walk up to those buildings and take really close pictures of all of it.
Every single window, every single mullion, every single brick, every graphic was faithfully put into the real deal of Cars Land, of Radiator Springs. We recreated that exact place to make the guest experience absolutely believable.
To summarize, All architects do design, but Imagineers do design in the context of story and character. Imagineers also use a few theatrical techniques in our architecture. For instance, on Main Street USA in Disneyland, we use a technique called forced perspective to make the street more comforting and human scale. We do this by making the second stories of the buildings slightly smaller than they would normally be, and the third stories are even smaller. It's a detail you might not notice directly, but you can feel the difference when you're standing on Main Street. But just like traditional architecture, our buildings also have to be functional, safe, and last a long time. That's why there are multiple types of architects at Imagineering.
Concept architects deal with anything guest-facing. We make sure that the creative intent and the story is fully realized in the environment around you. Project architects are those who are really passionate about how buildings put together. You know, they care about code, they do all the coordination between our 140 plus disciplines. They make sure that the building stands up and passes the test of time.
In a theme park, these aren't just sets, these are real buildings. These are restaurants, they're ride buildings, and these buildings have a lot of steel and engineering, and they have to last for, you know, a century. So all of the engineering and design of these buildings and the steel and all the systems that support the show is a very complex effort. It involves hundreds of people in the architectural trades.
In the land of Pandora is a gigantic 100-foot tall, 200 feet on a side, bigger than an acre, giant steel box, inside of which is the ride that you take, Flight of Passage. You have no idea that that box is there. It is completely hidden and disguised under a set of rocky cliffs and crags and floating mountains and gardens and waterfalls. And that is very, very different from the way a trained architect would think about building anything.
And when it's a ride facility, it's very complex because you are also trying to integrate a tremendous amount of technology. And in the case of Treasure Cove, it's a water ride. You have all of this water to manage and all of the show systems. If you strip away just the Caribbean facade of that building and look inside, it is a tangle of steel and conduit and pumps and catwalks. And all of that is what makes theme park design so complex.
Think about the millions and millions of people that will travel down the street in Radiator Springs and will go into all these buildings. And of course, they have to be very functional. Let's take Flo's V8 Cafe, for an example.
We looked at Flo's as being the main restaurant, but in the film Cars, it's a pretty small building, and we don't actually go inside that building in the movie. So we worked with our friends at Pixar to decide how we wanted to expand Flo's so that our guests could actually get inside and have a meal indoors. Flo was actually she was a Motorama girl from Detroit, so she had her singing group, and we decided that she would have built a showroom to showcase her singing group and all of their albums. And so we worked with Pixar together to create a bigger story. And actually, they added that showroom in the second film. So there's an overhead shot of Radiator Springs where you can see the showroom that we added in Cars 2, which is cool.
Hopefully you now have a feeling for how buildings and architecture can support the story and theme of a land while at the same time being functional and long-lasting. In this next exercise, you'll have an opportunity to analyze the buildings in a few different lands and to think about the architecture in your own land. Have fun! In the last video, we talked about how the architecture of buildings can be used to support the theme and story of a land. But buildings are just one part of creating the spaces in which our stories take place. Landscaping is another important aspect of themed environments. It might look like the plants in a land have always been there, but every hill, tree, rock, and blade of grass is carefully designed and placed to reflect the central story and theme. We talked earlier about how the architecture of a building can make you feel different ways. The same thing goes for a landscape. For example, large trees might make you feel like something's been there for a really long time, whereas thorny bushes could be scary and intimidating. Let's hear more from a few Imagineers about how they approach landscape design.
Landscape's a particularly hypnotic art form because trees and bushes so powerfully seem to be like they've always been there. So when you walk through a finished landscape, you have this powerful sensation that it's always been that way. And yet, of course, in our world, it's entirely designed and every bit as much designed as any form of architecture.
We worked very, very closely with our landscape designers who not only work the whole development of the site and how it's laid out, but in the choice of all the planting materials and the planting beds. In creating a land like Treasure Cove, we go from very formal gardens to very wild and tropical settings around our canoe ride, which is intended to be set right in the middle of the jungle.
For Disney's Animal Kingdom and for Pandora, we're working at a very, very high level of photorealistic detail. So we need things to look absolutely real. So for example, when we were sculpting the floating mountains, and I am looking at the model and I'm looking at all the roots and all the vines, and they have this oddly fantasy look to them. They look like they belong in a fairy tale because the designers are making them up. And when you make something up, you're using your brain to imagine how it would really be. But in the real world, there are so many factors affecting the way something looks that often, while it's very real, it doesn't make that much sense. So we hiked around in the jungle and we photographed and observed and sketched real tree roots and real vines on real giant trees growing in a real rainforest, which are doing things nobody would expect. They're past being logical. And so we brought all that information and they redid all these vines so that no longer did they look like an imaginary vine. Now suddenly they looked like real vines because they were coming from the observation of actual real vines growing in a real forest.
As Joe just mentioned, Imagineers often do a lot of research to understand how things look and behave in the real world. But our job isn't to recreate the real world. Rather, we use these observations to inform our design, to make our themed spaces more believable. Sometimes, Imagineers will use living plants in a landscape design. Sometimes they'll use fabricated human-made plants, and sometimes they'll use a combination of the two.
So in the case of Pandora, there was a very, very intimate collaboration between the landscape designers who are working with real living plants and the show set designers and rockwork experts who are actually creating artificial plants. And the point was, because they collaborated in this way, the final product makes it very, very difficult for a casual viewer to identify which plant is handmade and which plant is real.
We will oftentimes try to share a plant palette with the designers for the artificial foliage. A plant palette is the plant vocabulary that we're using to populate a land. So it's the species of trees that we're concentrating on. Any of the shrub and ground cover species, that all makes up the plant palette.
There are also some interesting challenges and opportunities when it comes to the practical issues of creating a landscape design. For example, can we get water to where it's needed? Can the plants survive in the local climate of the park? And how will the landscape change over time?
Landscape design is there to beautify. It's there to mask things that you don't want to see, like say a big air conditioning duct or a back of house door. So you plant very thickly to control what the guests see. And it also provides shade.
Somebody has designed all the underground plumbing to keep that landscape alive. Someone has figured out how to move these giant objects and put them in place.
Our story is set in the Caribbean. We wanted it to feel very tropical, but in reality, our land, Treasure Cove, is set in Shanghai, which has a very different climate and very different seasons of the Caribbean. So there is a real science to choosing the plants that are Caribbean and look and feel and maybe even indigenous to that area that will survive the cold winters of Shanghai.
There are tricks to getting a landscape to appear grown in and old, like it's been there for a long time. Just one example. You can go find a tree could be growing in somebody's yard next to their house. It's been growing there for 40 years, 60 years, and because of that, it's grown up next to the house, and then it bends away from the house and it grows up over there. So you buy that tree, you dig it up, you put it on a truck, you bring it to your theme park, you plant it, and then you build your building right next to it so that the building follows the shape of the tree. When you're done, it looks like that tree has been growing next to your building for 40 years, which means the building you just built that is less than a year old must be 40 years old.
Use the next exercise to explore how landscaping and plant life in your land will support your story and theme, while at the same time remaining practical and functional. In addition to plant life and buildings, it takes a wide variety of physical materials to create a land. The hardscapes, walkways, lampposts, backgrounds, railings, light fixtures, doors, the list goes on, and they all have to be made out of something. And that something must be durable, lasting for decades. Disney lands and attractions need to look as great on day 10,000 as they do on day 1. But the materials must also meet the creative requirements of the artists and designers. As we're about to hear, Imagineers spend a lot of time choosing and manipulating materials.
A tremendous amount of thinking goes into the choice of materials, building materials, flooring materials, drapery materials, everything that constitutes the physical presentation of a ride, show, attraction, land.
We use a lot of concrete, plaster, we use a lot of plastics, and we use these not necessarily because we love these materials, but because they're super, super durable and we have a high level of control over them.
If you think about guest flow in our Disney parks and about how many guests step through the Emporium on Main Street, for example, tens of thousands of people in a short amount of time. And so if you think about the flooring surfaces in that shop, we can't put in any materials that aren't going to last with all of that foot traffic going through.
So in fact, it's a fairly limited range of materials that we can use to build the places that we build. So a lot of attention has to go into the texture of the material, the temperature that material might acquire in broad daylight, and then oddly enough, the sound reflectivity of the material. So I could make an environment that's beautiful to look at, but when you put 185 people inside this environment, they can barely talk to each other because it's all hard surfaces and the sound is bouncing back at them.
So durability and practicality are clearly big issues when selecting materials. But the materials must also reflect the theme and story. Here are some examples.
We've done a lot of graphics for Tomorrowland, and in an environment like that, you would have maybe a lot of stainless steel, kind of shiny metal textures. But in something like Critter Country or Fantasyland, it would be much more in the fairy tale kind of environment. So you'd see a lot more wood or maybe kind of a hand-carved texture.
In a land that is inspired by the Caribbean, when you go there, you see such glorious color, beautiful tile work, really cool details of weathered wood with the knots coming out of it. Treasure Cove at one point was just crawling with artists painting and sculpting concrete and plaster and wood to simulate and look just like the photos we took in the Caribbean.
So Pandora, for example, texturally, everything has texture on it. The rocks are crusted with moss, the trees are knobby and spiky, whether they're real or not. We're trying to create a fantastically rich textural environment, and you touch a lot of this environment so that you feel that it is real.
Sometimes the material used is what you would expect. For example, a door that looks like it's made out of metal probably is made out of metal. But sometimes the material used isn't what you would expect. One example is the Finding Nemo submarine voyage at Disneyland, where the underwater coral reefs are actually covered with tiny little pellets of colored glass. That glass doesn't fade, keeping those reefs looking bright and vibrant even under very harsh conditions. And this isn't the only example.
Sometimes if we're making signs that are designed to look like wood, we work with people who are really skilled at sculpting pieces of material, maybe fiberglass or carvable epoxy to actually give it a wood grain texture. But when you actually see it in the park, it's not real wood. It may look like it, and it may almost feel like it when you touch it, but it's not the real thing. I'm still learning about materials all the time. I think as technology advances, we're going to see new materials with every project that we're on. But I would definitely say working on the Pandora project, we were looking at materials that had more of an organic kind of feel.
So we have to create a artificial plant material that is durable enough that it doesn't need to be maintained for decades. No such thing existed. That required manipulating a variety of materials: window, screen mesh, stainless steel mesh, automotive paints, very, very, very high test plastics to create something that was, in fact, it's full of steel, right? The window mesh is steel. It's not going to go anywhere, but the automotive paints give it this beautiful, transparent, plant-like quality when we're done, and you'd never know. You can't tell that this stuff isn't real.
There were some things that we saw in the Caribbean that we took, close-up shots of that we were in love with and thought were really important. And if we could recreate that for a guest, that might just be the thing that takes it over the edge. And one of those things was this glorious blue brick. Roads that were made out of blue brick. And we really, really wanted to at least do that in an area in the plaza in front of our restaurant. And so Catherine Jean, who is our creative director, went on a wide search in China to look for a pottery maker or a brick maker who could recreate that for us. And found this lovely woman who did custom tile, who made this blue brick for us. And everybody who walks by the land, it catches their eye. It turned out to be a really important element.
Now it's your turn. Use the next exercise to select the materials that you'll need to build your land. As we discussed earlier in this lesson, buildings and landscape are important visual elements in the construction of a land. Other big visual elements are illustrations, signage, and other forms of graphic design. And that's the topic of this video. Graphic design appears everywhere in a themed land. And like everything else, graphic design supports the theme and the story, so every single aspect or detail receives a lot of attention.
The story always comes first, even when it comes down to the graphics. So we work very closely with our creative director to get an idea of his or her vision and how can we tell the story through graphic design while keeping that vision in mind.
Graphic design comes in a lot of flavors inside of a theme park. So there's categories. One category is what we call ghost graphics. Ghost graphics are really just part of the set design, like the imaginary leftover graphics that tell you a place is real. In Pandora, if you go wandering through Pandora, there's all this leftover industrial stuff that tells you, oh, I see, this used to be some kind of industrial warehouse because look at those faded old words and graphics on the side of the building. I don't need to read them. They don't need to be legible. I don't actually need to ever look at them, but they're part of my set design. And that is graphics, and a graphic designer does that. Then there's another set of graphics that are inside the story, and they help me to understand the story. And so those could be the name of a shop.
And who's the character that lives there? And did he create the sign for that shop himself? Probably in the Caribbean, yes.
Barrels that have some copy on them. Any of those are just graphics that help describe what's going on, but also finish telling the story. There's also like letters from pirates, or there's fan mail to the cars in Luigi's. There's all sorts of that stuff that really is just a show element to the park.
So that's another form of graphic design. I'm supposed to read it, I'm supposed to look at it, and I'm supposed to understand that it's inside the story. Then there's another kind of graphics that are sort of super important legal or safety or directional graphics that I have to be able to read.
Those are really necessary to help a guest figure out how to get through each attraction, facility, restaurant.
Where's the entrance to this? Or how long do I have to wait in line for this attraction? Or where's the next land? And directional signage.
I must be able to read them. And so the range of design control over them is more limited because it is very important that I see it, that I recognize that it is a category of communication I am supposed to read, I have to read, and so it's very legible and usually a little more restrained. And the trick is to keep all of these balanced with each other so that they can do their function and that you don't become overly aware of the artificial difference between them.
To summarize the types of graphic design we use, we have ghost graphics that are part of the place's history, graphics that are part of the story, and operational signage for safety or navigation. Sometimes graphic design fades into the background, providing subtle, almost subconscious hints at story and theme. At other times, graphic design plays a central role. Let's hear about some of those examples.
Cars Land is a really great example of graphic design helping tell the story in a land. If you look around, there is signage everywhere. If you're walking down the streets, you just see street signs that really make you feel like you're on Route 66.
We faithfully recreated all of the neon, all of the signs, which was very much part of making that a very real and believable place.
You see posters telling stories about the different characters. There's a big, huge neon sign telling you to go into flows. They're not only based on the film, but we brought some to life to really further the development of the storytelling.
The interiors of Flo's B8 Cafe, for example, with all of the gold records from Flo and the Motorama girls back in the day, we got to make all of that up. And so all of the signage and the record labels and all of that, like, you know, Jeep date, and that was no accident. The graphics are a tremendous way to help tell that story.
When we were working on Shanghai Disneyland, we wanted to have our graphics be very closely married with the Chinese language as well. So when we chose our English fonts to fit within a certain theme, we wanted the Chinese copy to feel like that too. So we worked really closely with Chinese calligraphers who helped get to that goal.
So when you first cross the bridge into Pandora, the first sign that you see is very, very much like a sign you would see as you were entering a national park or eco-reserve in a place like South America, where you might go on an eco-safari. The style, the color, the palette, the choice of typography, the way illustrations are put on the sign should remind you of a nature reserve or a national park or a eco resort somewhere.
So in the case of Treasure Cove, we wanted to make sure you understood what this place was. There is a wrecked ship with a torn sign that hangs over the guest that says Treasure Cove. And so it's very clear that you're entering a pirate story.
What was really cool about working on Cars Land is we got to use real neon. We worked very closely with neon experts to understand the limitations and what we could do with neon to really tell the story. If you look in Radiator Springs in the film, there's neon everywhere, so we just wanted to bring that element of the film to life.
What role will graphic design play in your land? Use the next exercise to figure that out. We're all probably familiar with how important music and sound effects are in film and theater. These elements bring more depth and emotion to storytelling, and the same holds true for what we do at Imagineering. Sound design in our parks presents some interesting and unique challenges and opportunities. Let's hear from the experts.
So you build this land, and it's got everything that you dreamed of, but it doesn't really come to full life until you start to add music and sound.
So when we first sit down, we create an audio-centric version of this story, where we'll build off of the backstory that's been created by our show writer, and we'll flesh that out with audio details. What are the types of sounds you hear? How do you hear them? Does it sound different at night than at day? Is this a scary place? Is this a whimsical place? What is the motivation for everybody that may live in this place?
There's so much to it. There's not only just the musical theme or underscore, but there are sound effects. There are character voices.
There's a couple of different ways in which you experience music as you walk around Disneyland. There's a background music track almost everywhere that you are. And a lot of times these are tracks that are pulled from many different sources. We have music researchers that sit down with the creative directors and they come up with the feel, the mood, the energy of what a space should be. And then they go off and they listen to thousands and thousands of different music cues. And then they eventually come down to fit the story, to fit the mood, and to fit the emotion that we're trying to impart on our guests. When we're looking at music for an attraction, oftentimes that starts from scratch. We'll go out and find a composer, usually one that had worked on a film property, or one that has created music that's appropriate to this new experience we're creating, and we'll work closely with them to design the music in a way that can present well in a specific attraction.
Music is so key to a major attraction experience because it lets you know how you're supposed to feel. It accentuates the scene. I mean, imagine Pirates of the Caribbean without the theme song. Yo-ho, yo-ho, Pirate's Life for Me. Imagine It's a Small World without the song. It's the heart of the attraction.
There are some interesting practical considerations for how to deliver these sonic elements without taking guests out of the story. Considerations such as where to place the speakers, what kinds of speakers to use, and how to keep the sound in one area from being heard in other areas.
Our sound designers work very closely with the people who design the sound systems. This is a singular effort because the effect that you're trying to achieve is very dependent on your choice of speaker location, your choice of speaker.
We look very carefully at how all the speakers are aimed and where the sound will probably be perceived as you walk around the park.
There are dozens of very small speakers that are just a few feet away from you, but they're hidden by all the devices we use, plants, hidden in the design of the facilities.
We take very special care of merge points, areas where two tracks could possibly collide.
There are very, very directional speakers that will push sound only in a certain direction. And those are helpful in keeping sound contained. And then there are materials that will absorb sound very rapidly, so it'll drop off quickly, and you kind of know that. Sometimes you just need a boundary between space A and space B to just stop the sound from going. And then, of course, there's volume. How loud is the sound? Knowing it has to be loud enough to be heard over a big bunch of people. So it can't be too quiet.
And in the case of Treasure Cove, there are beautiful soundscapes as you move from the areas that are themed around the Spanish theatrical building that you have, flamenco guitar in the background, and beautiful Spanish music. The sounds you hear coming from the jungle are different there, to when you approach the Pirates building, where you have that grand score and that music that draws you to that building. And then you work around the bend, you work into the Caribbean area where the sound of tropical birds just overwhelms you. The design of the sound and the music all moves with you and doesn't bleed from one place to the other. So you have a sense again of journey, which was really a key theme in our land.
In the case of Pandora, once again, we want you to feel completely enveloped in this imaginary world, some other planet. This environment of sound changes all day long, from sunup to the closing of the park. So it's non-repeating, like a natural world. The sounds that you hear in the morning are totally different than the sounds you hear in the middle of the day, and the sounds you hear at the end of the day, and the sounds you hear at night. And then secondarily, there are little stories in those sounds. So if you listen carefully, you can hear mating calls, and mating calls don't sound like alarm calls, and you can hear alarm calls, territorial calls. You can hear little dramas taking place in the forest around you. And when that all comes together, it's like a wall of sound that you walk into when you walk into this world that surrounds you and helps you to believe that the place is real.
The audio team that put together the sound of the world as you walk around Pandora built this wonderful, living, breathing organism of a land. But we wanted to create the attraction experience as something different. So at the start of the queue line, you still hear some of these natural worlds, but as you get closer and closer to the moment where you're actually going to get on the ride, we start to strip these sounds away. And you find yourself in almost a sterile lab environment with hospital-like sounds. And then as you get closer to the experience, the physical spaces around you start to contract, and they get smaller and they get smaller. And we start to build in this throbbing tone that was comprised of a bunch of recordings I did at a power plant. You can almost feel the air is energized with suspense. And it culminates in you're sitting in this very confined space on this link chair that has this futuristic throbbing tone that plays off of that energy. And then when you go through this link moment, all of a sudden, all of those natural sounds come rushing back at you and they hit you like a wall of bricks. You're just overcome by it because we've stripped that all away. We created a synthetic environment and then we blast you back into the natural world, and it really takes your breath away.
So what will your land sound like? What music will you choose to support your story and theme? Will it be slow and moody or fast and exciting? Address these questions and more in the next exercise. Early in this lesson, we made the point that Imagineers tell stories using all our senses. We talked about how we engage sight through buildings, landscape, and graphics, hearing through music and soundscapes, and touch through the materials that guests touch as they explore the lands. This video is about how we engage the remaining two senses, taste and smell. Let's start with taste. Food is an important part of the theme park experience, and it can often tell a story itself. So we work hard to make sure that even the food offered is part of the themed experience. In some cases, specific items of food can become iconic to a land and tie really closely to the story and theme. To find out what that means in practice, let's hear more from our Imagineers.
You can take your food and you can make it very, very tied to the setting. If I'm in a place that looks like India, I can put Indian food in an Indian-looking place. In the case of Pandora, we're on an alien planet, and people do not really like to eat things that are alien in appearance, unfamiliar. This is an important meal for them. They're trying to feed their kids. They need to kind of have a sense of what they're going to eat. So we couldn't really rely on the setting of Pandora as the source for the food. We had to rely on the theme. And the theme is respect for nature and adventure. So by going to respect for nature, we could get food that was fresh, that was natural, that was sustainable, that was organic, that was put together in a beautiful and natural looking way. And the adventure came from the fact that you get to assemble your own meal. You get to pick from a variety of ingredients and make something yourself, which is a little tiny miniature form of adventure. So the core themes, intrinsic value of nature, transformation through adventure, personal call to action, even find a way of manifesting themselves in your ability to compose your own natural organic meal.
The restaurants in Treasure Cove wants to be consistent with the theme and the story of this land that is set in 1730. We didn't want it to feel like a big modern food hall, so we've actually designed the restaurant to feel like a lot of individual venues. So there's a place that feels like an old cigar lounge and another part that feels like a patio. And in the case of Pirates, it's a pretty special restaurant because just like the original attraction, the ride vehicle passes right by it. So the people sitting on the patio get to wave to the people on the boat and vice versa.
In honor of the story of Cars Land, that is Race Day in Radiator Springs, all of the residents got together and they tried to think about ways they could celebrate this event. And Sally, with Sally's Cozy Cones, decided that she would turn her cones into snack opportunities. She created certain snacks that were themed to the cones, frozen cone concoctions, for example, chili cone queso, and she had a little bit of fun with the names with the theme of the cones of her place.
Finally, let's talk about smell. Smell is a powerful sense. It's directly tied to your memory. For example, I can remember the first time I went on Spaceship Earth at Epcot and smelled Rome burning. It's a memory that's forever seared in my mind and I'll never forget. We don't use aromas everywhere in a land, but when we do, it can really help immerse you in a time and place.
Smell is a very powerful sense, and so when people do have smells, they react very strongly.
When you walk into a theme park, definitely one of the first things I remember hitting me as a kid is smells.
I remember as a kid walking down Main Street, I could smell that chocolate and those cookies wafting from the shop.
The smell of cotton candy, popcorn. Maybe it's things you'd only get to eat when you're in a theme park.
But it really helped set the scene. It really told the story of where you were.
Engaging all of your senses, and as much as you can, use them to trigger time and place and a sense of story. You want to do that. But in attractions, we actually do pump very deliberate smell into the attractions to, more fully immerse you in the story.
In Mickey's PhilharMagic, for example, when Donald Duck is in the Beauty and the Beast scene and Lumiere is singing Be Our Guest, and the pie, the apple pie comes out into the audience space and it smells like apple pie. It's part of making the whole experience very believable.
So what we did with Flight of Passage, instead of having like 4 really clear aromas, we created 4 basic chemical mixtures, and we would remix them very slightly over the course of the ride to get a bigger blend of aromas, but they're very subtle, so you don't get taken out of the story by the artificialness of having this smell coming at you. It's very delicate.
There are aroma experts and chemists that create smells.
This is a level of sophistication in aroma mixing that you really had to work almost with people who professionally do perfume to be able to get this kind of finesse.
So in the case of the Pirates attraction, Battle for Sunken Treasure, you go through a full-on battle between 2 full-scale pirate ships, cannons blasting. The smells we use are manufactured smells. They're like little crystals with scents that have been designed to smell like something. There's thousands of different scents. I mean, there's everything from bubble gum to moss to gunpowder. We tested several things that were called gunpowder that we didn't think smelled like gunpowder. And then I think we wound up picking one that I think was called burnt metal or something. But it's the one that wound up smelling like gunpowder.
In this next exercise, you'll have a chance to think about the food you would serve in your land and the smells you'll use to add depth and authenticity to the environment. As you now know, there are an enormous number of considerations that are taken into account when designing a themed land, and it takes a large number of people from over 100 different disciplines to create it. So with all these different people working together to create something that's never been built before, how do we make sure that everyone has a common understanding of the vision? Communicating complex ideas between all these different people can be a real challenge. We use lots of different ways to convey the ideas behind our designs, whether it's quick sketches, architectural drawings, engineering blueprints, physical models, digital models, the list goes on. One important tool we use is called a mood board. Its role is to help convey the feeling of a land, to help Imagineers understand what it should look like and feel like, and how guests will react emotionally as they travel through the land. Let's hear a little bit more about what a mood board is and how it's used.
When Imagineering sets out to design a new land or a new attraction or a new space, we tend to put together what we call a mood board.
A mood board is a way of conveying how do I want you to feel? Exactly how do I want you to feel? And who else ever in the realm of art history and design has ever tried to accomplish that, and how did they do it?
We will use anything and everything to communicate an idea, from high-tech 3D models that you fly around to a scrap of wood I found on the ground that it's just perfect for this, and it all goes up there.
Anything that will help a person understand what are you getting at.
We start to do research into materials, into colors.
Oh, you'd use anything, cutouts from a magazine.
Some images of how we might want the lighting to look.
Pictures of artwork.
Images of some of the buildings.
Pictures of ducks and bunnies.
Images of some really good rust.
Hardware.
Vinyl that would go on the seats.
The textures.
Really unique wall covering.
Plaster.
Beautiful pictures of bioluminescent coral reefs with coral fish in it. That's not what we're building, but it's like what we're building.
Then we might do another board that's just about color. How do the colors shift from place to place to place? What are the areas that are warm? What are areas that are cool? What are the areas that are really vibrant and colorful and theatrical?
We'll have like an image of some of the foods. Maybe there's a great pie shop and those pies look really good, so you stick that on the mood board.
So it's 2 things. Emotionally, how do I want you to feel? And intellectually, what do I want you to know? And how am I taking you through this journey simultaneously as I actually build the thing that I'm really going to build.
Generally, it takes years from the time a land is first being envisioned to opening day when the first guests get to enjoy it. Along the way, projects will often evolve, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot. A mood board can be very helpful in making sure that you always stick to the vision, the core theme of your land, and what you want your guests to see, feel, and experience.
This business is very different from the private work of a single artist. Everything is negotiated. And so you have to have this very, very open habit of being able to talk to other people about their needs and their desires for the same project and shepherd this project forward, bringing all these people together, flowing in the same direction, but not very rigidly.
So the advantage of having these big boards with a lot of images on it just put up with push pins is that along the way, every time a new designer or artist comes to the project, they might bring a new idea, and then you can just take the old one off and put the new one on and keep updating it as more and more team members get involved.
So by the time you're done with this process, very often you have something you could not have predicted at the beginning. But if you've done your job right, it still reflects the intentions that you had at the beginning. Let's just say I was going to do a mood board for Pandora, and I want you to understand this place is strange and new, and this place is not threatening, right? So I'm going to make a bunch of choices about shape language. That might lead to a chart of ovals and curves over here. I'm going to express this with egg-like shapes, round shapes, soft shapes. Those are friendlier. And yet at the other side, here are unexpected things, things that are the wrong scale, things that are upside down, things that are a color I do not expect, details that I don't expect to see. So I'm telling you that it is strange and new, and I'm showing you that it is friendly and approachable.
If I was doing a mood board and I was presenting it to somebody and I wanted them to experience taste and sound, I would probably DJ my own soundtrack and play it while I'm presenting, and I would likely bring snacks.
And sing the pitch.
Congratulations on reaching the end of this lesson on building lands. Now, use this last exercise to create a mood board for your land. Be sure to use as many different materials as you can think of, things like photographs, sketches, magazine clippings, fabric swatches, rocks, tiles, whatever you think will help convey what your guests will see, feel, and experience as they move through your land. After that, be sure to check out the other lessons on your journey through Imagineering in a Box.